Okay, thank you, Andrew. Your people are your true disruptive edge. What does that mean? Well, Andrew has just gone through the reasons why and how you can disrupt. What I'm here to do is to take you all on a deep dive more into the how. So as a VP of Engineering of Contino, I actually started my career 16 years ago in the enterprise. I worked in the enterprise for about a decade, and I decided I want to move into the cloud with the microservices, containers, and eventually serverless. So I actually did move into the startup world across multiple startups, but then my passion remains with the enterprise, with the large-scale industries, because they make a difference. They make a difference to people's lives, and they're bringing business value, and then to ordinary consumers, everybody's consuming a lot of products from these large enterprises, and I really felt the need to go back to the enterprise and help. So how do I do that? When I joined Contino, I realized there's a lot of synergy between what I was trying to do and what Contino is doing already in the enterprise. And there's actually a secret sauce. And that secret sauce is actually not technology. It is to do with the people. And I will actually tell you the secret sauce towards the end of my slides. So I'm going to take you through a series of stories from an idea to a business case, to a proof of concept, and then to production. But before the journey starts, before we all embark on this journey, we need to have a team. So you can imagine if we are in a team playing football, everybody will have your different skill sets. You might have a quarterback, you might have a fullback, you might have a runner, but everybody shares the same vision, the same business vision. And why is that important? Because as technologists, we must understand the product that we're building and the reasons why. So I've been having a lot of good conversations at the summit. There was a young software engineer who asked me, so you're Mr. Serverless, right? You must be like the tech guru. So tell me, how can I improve my career? How can I progress as an engineer? Well, the answer that I had to him was, well, the answer is actually not to do with technology. It's not about focusing on certifications. That's all important. But more importantly, you must understand the business value. In the teams that you work in, you must all be aligned and share the same vision. Because transformation, at the end of the day, is a team sport. It's the responsibility of everybody to transform, not just from the top down or from the bottom up. And that brings me to my next point, which is to align the stakeholders. And this can be very hard at times, because it's easier to place a bunch of ducks in the river and line them up, but if you want to align the top down and the bottom up, it is not so easy. Just to illustrate, let's have a show of hands of everybody in the room that have a brilliant business idea that would solve a real business problem. But you were shut down because that's not how the business do things. Right? It's actually most people in the room, because as technologists, as engineers, as BAs, as testers, we want to do good work, right? We want to help the business. But a lot of times, upper management say, well, no, that's too risky, you know. Have you thought about the business impacts? And then we get shut down. And how many of you have done work for months on end and only to realize that it actually didn't solve the business problem? Right? So that illustrates there's actually a disconnect a lot of times in the workplace between the top-down management, the direction, versus the bottom-up support that actually has to be on the ground doing the work. So how do we align the two? How do we align the bottom-up with the top-down strategy? I think it comes down to two things. You have to have a good idea that solves the true business problem, and you've got to be able to build a business case around it. So let's think about our ideas. With all businesses, we all face the same problem, the same old problems since, when commerce started. We all want to get our products out there faster, better, reliably, more secure. At the same time, we want to be training our workforce. We want to be hiring good people to build even better products. And we also want to kind of limit our costs and kind of increase our margins, right? So as you heard from my colleague Andrew with the Allianz case study, the idea was to get to a new horse insurance market within a limited amount of time, and 18 months was too much. So the idea was actually to adopt a new way of working to achieve the same outcome within 3 months. And I'm sure a lot of you in your current industry, you have these ideas. You want to make it happen. You want to get your product out there to the consumer faster, better, more secure, and reliably. However, within the last decade, we are faced with so many more challenges. Big data, machine learning, AI, self-driving trucks. As a logistic company, there were no self-driving trucks 10 years ago. As a consulting company, Contino wouldn't even exist 10 years ago. Because there was no such challenges. It was all about dealing with the old problems, right? Let's just get bum on seats. Let's get bodies into a shop. Let's just do the work and get the product out there. But these days, you got to be more innovative than that. You got to think about your competitors who have more data collected from the same customer that you have access to, simply because they know how to mine it. They know how to liberate that value from those data. And then they can make tailor-made, customized products and predictions and recommendations based on the proprietary data that they have. But yet you have the same access to the same data. However, because the fact that you're not leveraging the latest technologies, you're not able to kind of have that same competitive edge. So how do you get that? How do you fulfill that innovation gap, that skill gap, right? You have the idea, and you do want to make it happen. Then you need, again, the right skill set. And that brings me to the whole upskill and due delivery approach. As Andrea has also highlighted, we have done a survey realizing that all digital projects, 90% of them require upskilling of the existing employees. How do you upskill? There's a lot of best practices around upskilling, kind of to do with pair programming, workshops, university, cloud university, kind of academy classes. There's also a new concept known as mob programming, where the whole team sit together and kind of collaborate on the same piece of work. And even before you think about the upskilling aspect, you might also think about whether you want to build that capability internally, insourcing on your own staff versus outsourcing to a kind of delivery center elsewhere. And I kind of compare this to a recent kind of episode in my life where I actually dislocated my finger playing basketball. And then by the time I got to the physio, they gave me two options. You can either make a quick fix, and I will do some exercise with your finger, and then you have to come back to me every week. But then it will cost you a lot, but you don't have to do anything on your own. Or I can give you the permanent fix, which is you follow this set of exercises, you go back home, you keep doing the exercise on your finger, and you don't have to come back and see me again. So you can imagine which one I choose, right? It was more cost-effective for me to do my own exercise, to kind of strengthen my own finger, and not having to go back to the physio every time. So insourcing compared to outsourcing, I think we truly believe that the right strategy is to insource your own capabilities, build your own IP, and continuously improving on that internally. So now we have the idea, we know that we want to build our own internal capabilities by insourcing. Now we need to build a business case, right? Because there might be resource requirements, there might be cost constraints. We need to justify a business case to our senior stakeholders to make this happen. So in terms of software delivery practices and DevOps maturity, out of everyone in the room, do you work in a kind of low, zero to none kind of DevOps software delivery status? No? Like around the medium, you're reasonably good with your software delivery practices, but there's still room to improvement. Yep. And who works in like a perfect DevOps world where software is being shipped out every minute and like everything's perfect? Okay, on the back, great. I mean, at the end of the day, we know what is good, right? We look around, we go to meetups, we see other companies doing good work, and we know where we stand as a company compared to other kind of best practice industries out there. However, how do we quantify that? How do we put metrics and numbers so that we can present this to our senior stakeholders to get buy-in? There's many schools of thought on this, and there's actually many different ways of doing this. At the end of the day, what you need is a set of metrics that measure your current maturity in terms of DevOps and software delivery compared to other industries in your peer group. So if you're a bank, you want to measure your maturity against other banks on a global basis. And that will kind of give you an indication of where you are and where you need to improve. And once you have those metrics, that will help you to calculate your return on investment. How much is the outage costing you? That Twitter from the customer feed, from the Twitter feed from the customer who gave the negative feedback, is that costing you in dollars and cents? When there's an incident, is that costing you? When there's a delay in your deployment to production, how much is that costing? And if you can improve that from your current, like say 50% to 70%, is that then increasing in value? How do you measure that? So at Contino, we have made a scientific process around how to measure both your maturity and also calculate your total cost of ownership and your return on investment. So that's just one way of doing this. This is also built on kind of a lot of the leading research done in this area. And now we have our business case. And this business case is now approved. Let's go and build something, right? This is actually one of my interview questions I always ask everyone coming through as a consultant or the engineer is, how do you prove that your idea is great? You got the buy-in, I've seen it on the slides, prove it to me. And the answer they will always give is, I will build you a prototype. And basically that prototype is what we call a Lighthouse Project. Because a lot of organizations that we see, they have this approach where we're going to get 3,000 applications into the cloud by tomorrow. Well, in reality, that doesn't work, right? How about you pick 3? And then you pretty much light the way. You find out where the rocks are, and you avoid going there, and then you pick the next 3, or maybe the next 10. Right? So that's what the Lighthouse Project is about. And I'm going to share with you some of our really interesting Lighthouse projects around the world. First of which is the Open Banking Initiative. So as we all know, UK has recently launched the Open Banking regulation. So pretty much all the banks is, instead of kind of fighting disruption, they're actually kind of jumping on the disruption bandwagon and joining up with third-party providers who can give better user experience, but using their bank's infrastructure via open banking. So we were involved as part of the kind of architectural to offer architecture guidance, and this is actually one of the reference architecture that we have proposed. So kind of based on the maturity of the bank, you can pick either to use the serverless technologies with serverless database, such as DynamoDB, or you can use a more container-based approach, or somewhere in the middle with managed containers such as ECS. But at the end of the day, all of these implementations share one common factor, which is they all kind of call back to base. There's always an on-prem database, on-prem data center, which is connected securely via Direct Connect. So that's kind of like a more traditional API approach, but applied to a bank. And we kind of talked about machine learning and AI, and we know that kind of we can use machine learning to do facial recognition, to monitor traffic, apply it to social media. I spoke to a very interesting researcher from Cyro yesterday. They were doing genome research using serverless technologies and machine learning. But how do we apply it to the financial industry, to the heavily regulated kind of, to the banks and the insurance? Well, when you think about it, Allianz, a company such as Allianz with 127 years of history, they have a lot of data, right? They pretty much have all this data around insurance quotes, around the customer history, what they've done. They can actually use that data to form very customized quotes to their customers, to their existing customers, based on all of their existing product holdings. They don't actually need to get out to different vendors and get different proprietary products, which are kind of all disparate and not connected and not sharing the same information set. So based on the information that they already have, they can mine that data And based on the activity that they can openly collect from the web and from various sources within kind of legal constraints, collect the data around the activity of a particular customer and give a much better competitive product and rate compared to other banks or insurance companies. So this is actually coming from a particular project we're doing in the US with a large beverage company. So the idea is that using serverless, you can actually connect your AWS infrastructure with your existing identity providers, right? Because if you're a large organization, chances are you will have some sort of Active Directory. For your customers, you might be leveraging OpenID from a different provider, such as Okta or Auth0, or you might have built something purely custom. But when you're using AWS, you want to leverage your existing identity provider. So it's pretty much Contino and serverless for the rescue, right? As your customers come in, they actually authenticate with your existing identity provider, and then the token will get passed back into your cloud infrastructure, and then they will be authorized, and then they can proceed. So we kind of talked a lot about various kind of high-level services around serverless, machine learning, API gateways, but the foundation infrastructure, you still need to build that. Even for serverless architecture, you might still want to use VPCs. You might want to have your Lambda within a VPC connected to an RDS within a private VPC. This infrastructure still needs to be set up in a secure way following the well-architectured framework. But do we really want to be spending all this time repeating and building the well-architected framework? It's well-architected, right? It's a boilerplate. We know what's involved. We can bootstrap it. So there are various solutions out there. We have our own proprietary solution for bootstrapping infrastructure. And you might say, well, I might not need that much infrastructure. I need a container, a cluster. I need a CD pipeline. But then what if I want to go to serverless? I don't need a container infrastructure anymore. What have you got for me? How can you help me embrace serverless architecture in an enterprise-grade, production-ready fashion? Well, I'm actually very pleased to announce that as of yesterday, Contino is actually partnering with AWS on a brand new set of workshops that are aimed for the enterprise to adopt serverless. It's called ASAP, so it stands for Accelerated Serverless Adoption Program. It's basically a free 2-day workshop where you get to present your business problem, and we will come and help you build that out into a proof of concept within 2 days. So if you're interested, by all means, speak to your account manager, talk to us over a stand C2, and I'm more than happy to help you out. And lastly, this is actually my secret sauce. All the startups I go to, all the enterprise clients I visit, with all the technology and all the servers, all the containers, it really comes down to the operating model. Right? You might think, why is the VP of engineer sitting here talking about operating model? Shouldn't he be talking about more cool tech? Well, yes, but the cool tech is only get you so far. With the people, process, and technology, it's actually the people and the process that's more important. And by the way, this diagram is more of a kind of a joke. It's not really reflecting how Amazon structure is like. It's just take it with a pinch of salt. This is a classic example of lift and shift without dealing with the proper people and the process, where you have application. It's not so great. You move into the cloud, and it actually gets worse. Why? Because there's two reasons, right? You might not have the right consumption model for that cloud infrastructure. It's in the cloud, but nobody else knows how to use the cloud, and people actually don't know how to access the cloud, because not everybody is necessarily an expert in the cloud. Someone else came and did the work. Your staff are not trained to leverage the cloud to its full potential, and that piece of code actually gets worse as time goes on because it deteriorates and it's not re-platformed and it's re-architectured and continuously improved, and nobody knows how to handle that piece of code anymore. And typically what happens in that situation is, well, that particular monolithic software was deployed, say, once a quarter or once a month. In the cloud, it's still being deployed once a quarter, once a month, because the risk hasn't been mitigated. it's still just as risky to touch that code as it was back on-prem. And you might think, well, but once I'm in the cloud, I'm more stable, right? I can scale, I can horizontally scale, I can kind of be more resilient. But at the end of the day, as a customer, you probably don't really care so much about resiliency or stability because that is assumed. That's taken for granted, right? Everybody must be stable and must be resilient, whereas you should be competing on how fast you get your product out to market. And the other kind of downside of doing lift and shift without planning is that you can give too much freedom to everybody. And everybody now spins up a stack, right, without thinking. And nobody goes and cleans it up, and at the end of the day, you end up with 100 stacks, and nobody knows which stack is doing what. You need guardrails and regulations and process around cloud adoption. And this is my favorite, microservices envy. And I can kind of say this because I've done this, right? I split up a bad piece of code into multiple microservices without worrying about the people in the process. And in the end, nobody can manage that. And you can see that the ops people are crying now because it's basically, they only had one piece of monolithic software to worry about. Now they got 6 micro monoliths, and they can't handle that. And that's not how you do microservices. You don't just jump into microservices without tackling the proper operating model. So how do we do it properly? Well, it kind of goes back to this philosophy known as the Conways Law, right? So in 1968, Melvin Conway came up with the observation that based on your operating model, based on your organization structure, your systems will always end up in a similar architecture as your organization structure. So you can see here, if I were to make a change from UI down to middleware, down to the data analytics, and then down to operations, there's many handover points. And there's actually no clear lines of accountability. There's many points of friction. I'll be passing tickets back and forth between the different teams. And I'm actually not getting my value out to the customer. Whereas if we reverse the Conway's Law and focus on our business capabilities first and organize our teams according to the business capability, then things are very different. You can imagine each microservice will have its own cross-functional team. They will talk to the other services via a well-defined API contract. So they are actually free to deploy whenever they need to without being constrained by other teams. And in the Allianz example, the first microservices built was for the horse insurance industry, but they could now very well leverage that structure and set up a new team for the pet insurance industry. And the pet insurance and the horse insurance industry are totally decoupled, and they can scale and innovate based on their own pace. And they can then take that practice and move it into the car industry, and everybody will have their own set of microservices and be able to innovate. So that's actually kind of comes to the end of my talk. I've taken on the journey from the idea to the business case, to the proof of concept, and now with the operating model to take it into production. I will hand over back to Andrew to close. No.
Thanks, Jan. So to sum up, disruption, as we've shown, is inevitable. It's happening faster than before. We feel that at Contino, we can offer you a fantastic way to avoid that disruption in your business and really use that framework that we showed you before, that and work with you on that dual delivery and upskill model. As Jan outlined, he had made a few amazing points, that staying relevant is a team sport. And I strongly encourage you to think about some projects in your business that could benefit from this approach. And we, the team, would be absolutely delighted to speak to you about any of those at our stand. Now, before you go, we have an exciting announcement to make. This was announced this morning. So Contino is partnering up with the Nebula team. So this is a great DNA match for our organization. We at Contino were one of the fastest to reach Premier status with AWS. The Nebula team has soared from standard to advanced partner in record time. And as you saw earlier in the week, recently was one of the finalists for the AWS Partner of the Year and the AWS Rising Star. So Craig Howe is it will be leading the combined entity in APAC for us, which is fantastic. So we immediately can offer scale across multiple different businesses, and we have a massive experience across all the enterprise customers that we've worked with. So that's a really fantastic announcement for us, and really pleased to be able to share that with you this morning. We really would like you to come and say hi at the stand. We're at C2. We have lots of different prizes. We have a spinning wheel. Please come along. That seems to be really popular. We would love to talk to you about coming to run some workshops that can run through that dual delivery and upskilling approach and how your business can benefit from that. Please follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. And I just want to say thanks very much for coming along today. Thank you, Jan. That was a fantastic talk.